part of the Another Realm Media Network. Welcome to this episode of Mysterial Experiences, where we delve into the heart of mystery and the ethereal. Today we invite you on a voyage through shadowed realms of the unexplained. From spectral whispers to cosmic enigmas. Join us as we explore tales and phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, in a quest to uncover truths hidden in the fabric of the extraordinary. Prepare for a journey into the unknown, where each revelation is a step closer to unraveling the mysterious. I'd like to welcome Irena Scott onto the program today. Irena has a lot of experience and history working with government agencies for photograph review, as well as working with MUFON both nationally and internationally, which, as a MUFON member myself, I only just really realized how much of an international presence MUFON has. But of course, they, stepped in when Project Blue Book went away, so that only makes sense. So welcome, Irena, to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome. On a really personal level, I must say that I have two daughters, twins that are 9, and one of them, for as long as I can recall, since she's really started kind of thinking about what she wants to be in life, has wanted to be a veterinarian. And so when I saw your bio that you have your degree in veterinarian medicine, it was just really interesting to me that our paths would cross, so to speak. She first started wanting to be a dinosaur named Linda, but shortly after that decided that veterinarian services are her thing. And so yeah, just very cool.
Yeah.
So
I hope she gets to be.
I hope so too. Every time we ask her, no, what
So
are you
you
going to
finished
be?
the
It's
occupation.
always veterinarian. So, um, but
Great.
so you started, though, if I could maybe take the liberty of saying, you started your professional career in an area that most would probably not consider to be of the paranormal UFO-y type experience, but as your professional career progressed, you, I guess, moved over into those areas. Could we maybe start with what led you to have an interest in the UFO space, to want to be involved?
Well, actually, I wanted to be an astronomer, but they didn't let females in then.
Mm.
And so I wound up in other fields. But um, by the time I had my Ph.D. in another field, they started letting females in, which
Oh.
was like for me. But I didn't drift into it before when I was just a very small kid. My sister and I had the first experience. And at that time, we didn't know what UFOs were or anything else, but we had what would be considered now a close encounter.
Mm.
And like it was years before we even heard of UFOs. After that, we were just poor and in an old farmhouse and everything. But we were sleeping in an attic room on 2 sides. And we were real young. I don't know if I was in school or not. And my sister was not in school. She was sure of that. So we may have been about 4 and 6. And we didn't have too much experience in media or anything because our parents just had a radio and they were farming with horses and stuff. So I woke up and there was this thing flying around inside the room. And I didn't know my sister was awake, but I didn't know what it was. And it was just like a little, you might call it, today you'd call it a tic-tac. It looked like a literal tic-tac, though. It was just a little kind of like it was oval object, and it looked like it was hot iron or something about that color. And just flying around the room. Didn't blink on and off like a lightning bug or anything. It was just kind of like it was looking around, and it got close to us several times. And then I noticed that the room was dark and it was summer and there was no storm going on. And I know why I know that, but I noticed that it didn't bump into anything. The room was dark, but it seemed to be able to see. And it would go to a wall and then it'd turn and it'd go around furniture and stuff. It didn't, um, it knew where everything was. And it was just like it was roaming around. And I was just curious. And then it flew up to the ceiling. And before it got to the ceiling, it turned, it flew along the ceiling. This was an attic room with walls that slanted in
Yep.
about 3 feet between them. And there was a chandelier in the middle. Well, it flew over the chandelier, and without feeling its way around or anything, it came to the chandelier right where it could circle without touching the wall or the chandelier.
Mm.
And it began to circle and circle and circle and circle. And then it just came down a spiral right exactly until it was just about under the chandelier. And then we both became terrified at the same time
Mm.
and ran out of the room. And we were so terrified, we bumped into each other and fell down the steps. And then we couldn't get the door open. Finally went screaming to our parents. And they said, it didn't happen and everything. But there were two of us. And like if it just happened to one of us, they'd have said
Yeah.
it didn't even, we would have believed them. But we weren't even talking to each other, and we saw both of us saw the same thing. So we knew we were telling the truth, whether they did or not.
Right.
But it what was it was if until it got under the chandelier, I was just curious and wondering what it was. Then I was just absolutely terrified, just beyond
Mm.
anything, just terrified. And she was too. And so it was sort of funny because we both must have woke up about the same time. I think she woke up before I did for no reason. It wasn't making any noise or anything.
Right.
And then we both became terrified at the same time and started screaming and ran out of the room. And it seemed like it was like there was some kind of metal thing going on with it too, on account of that.
Mm. It's the description that you use, it makes me remember or think of the descriptions that are used in the 17th century and 18th century of sprites or the small fairies, or and that even carries through, I think, into some more movies of the current generation, or even after, or even later, of what's just depicted for fairies or sprites. I had a similar experience in my backyard. I recently moved here from Kentucky, and I'm in Arizona now. And I was out walking my dog. This is like right after maybe a month after we had moved here, and we had just gotten a dog, and I was walking it in the backyard just to make sure it didn't, stumble into the pool into the pool at midnight or something. So, um, and I was standing in my backyard, and down near the ground in the grass area, um, there was just this little flickering light, and I watched it for a little bit, and it kind of flickered, and it didn't really move, but it was like it was signaling at me, like kind of like a signal lamp. It would flash almost like a code type situation, and I kind of watched it for a while, and then it kind of shot really quickly over to one side, and it kind of flashed a little bit more, and then it didn't happen again. And so I am constantly like, I want to make sure I've ruled every prosaic solution out before I call it anything other than whatever it was. So I noticed that the street light would reflect off of my pool, and so I moved into position where I could see the street light reflecting. But in that position, I was in a completely different part of the yard, and that light reflecting was nowhere near where I had seen it that night. So it's just, but I attribute that very much to the feeling that I had an experience with a fairy or a fae, and so it's just, when you give your accounting of your first experience, that's what jumped into my mind is kind of a fairy or a fae type experience. So. Um, Thinking back to when you were that age and after that experience occurred, were you uneasy to go back into your room? How did you feel after it?
Oh, I was scared to go in our room, and my father didn't believe us, and he said, either go back there or I beat you up. And so
Mm.
we both stood there ready to get. And then
Yeah.
finally, my mother said, "Go up and look." And so he went up and looked. There was nothing there. And so we went back upstairs. But yeah, I was scared. I didn't have any idea what it was.
Yeah. Um, so did you continue to have experiences or as a younger child, or, was that kind of the, one that happened and then you didn't have something until much later in life?
No, I many years later I read Jenny Randall's book called Star Children, and
Mm.
she says that people that have experience with small globes of light often later um, will have more than one be a repeater on
Mhm.
UFOs, and both of us sort of were. And we also had another very close encounter together of a UFO later.
Have you had accounts? I guess you had experiences separate from one another.
Yeah, separate and together both.
Okay. The experiences that you've had while separated from one another, are they similar in nature or different?
I think she had two, and one of them was it's where we live now. We moved away and then moved back, um, and she saw a UFO over this relative's farm.
Mm.
Her husband said, "Oh, it was nothing," but she has real good eyesight, and he's sort of doesn't have good eyesight. And then later, I was talking to the cousins, and they said um, the son said that his parents had left him alone one night for the very first time when he was growing up, and a UFO came down and landed in their field, and he was just absolutely terrified.
Mm.
And the lights went off, but he was able to call his parents on the phone, and they got home. And neither of them remembered exactly the date, but I think it was almost to the same month anyway. And we just couldn't get it on the same date because neither remembered the date. And that was later. And then she was a missionary in Brazil, and um, she and another missionary driving along in a jeep, and she said the the forest was just right up to the road. There was just a little path through the forest, and they saw a light ahead. And so the man tried to get over so a car could pass, and
Hmm.
then the light just disappeared. But she said he never talked about it again, so she didn't talk about it either.
Mm.
Um, and so she had two, and I had several experiences also separately from her.
So it sounds like that, and I've heard from other, I don't know, ufologists or we'll call them specialists, let's say, in the area in the field, that these when these accounts occur, they tend to be associated with a family. Like it's not just a random occurrence of one specific family member that often has an experience, but rather it's a number of family members. It's just maybe that the others who are having experiences either just dismiss it as whatever, they're just unwilling to accept or process what it could mean, or they're just unwilling to talk about it because of the taboo that's on it in society. But it sounds like in your case, at least, that maybe it was a family affair, that there were others within not just your immediate nuclear family, but also in your broader family that were having experiences.
Yeah, and my parents were real skeptics and they didn't want us to talk about it. But that first one, we never heard of UFOs, so we didn't know we were talking about UFOs. We
Right.
talked about it to everybody. But then, later, my parents clamped down. They didn't want us, everybody think we're crazy, so they said, don't talk about it. Um, and but yeah, I'm very lucky with my sister because she'll talk about it, and she wrote reports and things. And a lot of people say that when they have something like that with a sibling or something, that the other one won't talk about it at all. So I
Mhm.
was really glad, but we got harassed, quite a bit when I started talking about it.
Well, and it's nice that you have someone who has had similar experiences to yourself, that you there's a feeling that you're not alone, right? And that's that's ultimately why I'm even doing this podcast, is to let other people know that may be out there, that they're not alone, that this is happening to a lot of different people. And it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what your background is, whatever. There seems to be no identified selection process for who has an experience and who does not. Um, so, if we could just maybe jump ahead a little bit, because I know a mutual friend, and I think co-author on one of your books, Philip Mantle, introduced me to you because of a book that you had written about the Pascagoula abduction. On another podcast that I do with a friend of mine, we had actually last year covered the Pascagoula abduction, so I'm pretty familiar with the case. I'm curious what I have not read your book. I apologize, but I'm curious what led you to the case. What interests you about it?
Well, what interested me was is that something happened in my family at exactly the same time as the Pascagoula.
Mm,
Um, I mean, I didn't know anything about it for quite a while, but I was living in Missouri, and my mother was living in Ohio, which is about 600 miles away.
mm-hmm.
And one night, my mother called and said, "Did you hear that noise?" And I, I started teasing her because,
Yeah.
you know, um, and I started, telling her to go to the insane asylum and everything, but in a teasing way. And she was a real skeptic, but she kept just insisting and asking me if I heard a noise. And I said no, and you're crazy and so on. And then she called several days later and said there's this huge, massive UFO wave going on there, and that
Mm,
it was so bad that people were staying in at night and keeping their kids in and everything else. Well, I that was in Ohio, and I was in Missouri, and I wasn't paying too much attention because I had other things to do.
mm-hmm.
But many years later, I was in the Ohio State University library, and they had actual newspapers in the library back then.
Yeah.
Um, and so you didn't go crazy looking at all these little things. And so, anyway, I decided to go in and see if I could find when that happened. And I didn't expect to because I couldn't remember the date. And I was just guessing. And there were a million papers. And I thought, well, I'll look at two or three and forget about it. But I thought it was middle of October 73. And so I went in and I pulled about three papers down. And I actually found a little tiny note on a strange sound. And then I looked a little bit more, and it talked about a UFO wave and things. And so I found the date. Well, the date was the same as the date and time were just the same as the
Exact same.
abduction. But I didn't pay attention to that at all. But I was kind of interested in what the sound was. And I started exploring, and I submitted something to a scientific journal. I wasn't in UFOs at all at that time. And then the state seismologist of Ohio contacted me, and he was interested in it. And he helped me find seismograph recordings and things like that. And so I reported in scientific literature way back in the 1970s, maybe the 80s. The 80s. But anyway, then many years later, just a few years ago, Philip wanted somebody to in the United States to interview people in Pascagoula.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I had that sound had been at the same time as the abduction, which I hadn't paid attention to at all. But he was in England, he has an accent, and down in Pascagoula, they have an accent. And I was kind of in between and knew the time zones and things. And so I started interviewing people. And then we collected quite a bit of information, and we had enough for a book. So we started on a book. And the reason I did that was because I had already had an interest in that sound.
Mm-hmm.
It happened way, way back. So it was sort of a coincidence, but it was sort of cool.
So, just out of curiosity, because I've had a similar experience in Kentucky several years ago that involved the sound, and so I'm curious what if and without asking you to make the sound, but if you could describe kind of what it sounded like as it was described to you.
Well, I found two seismograph recordings of it. And it was a huge sound. It went from Iowa all the way across the country to the coast, and it was very wide, and it was much wider than anything
Mm.
from a jet plane or anything, and nobody could explain it. But I don't know. There's no record that there's
Yeah.
any recordings, but there are two seismograph recordings.
So it's interesting. My the sound that I have was um my I had an older dog at the time, and he had woken me up anxiously wanting to go outside. So I had gotten up to let him outside, and when I opened the sliding patio door to let him go outside, I noticed there was this really low um, hum, for lack of a better word. I was out in the city that I was living in Kentucky was a smaller town, and where I was in my neighborhood was uh, a couple miles from from the interstate, and really close to just farm country. There were farms that surrounded all around these 79 houses that had just kind of been randomly placed in this little neighborhood. And so there was nothing to explain this kind of low drum, not this low hum that I was hearing in the air. What it felt like to me was there was just this something large just hovering just above the housetops. I couldn't see anything. I remember looking at the night sky, and I saw stars, but nothing that really seemed out of the ordinary. But my dog did not want to come inside after he had done his thing, and so I ended up having to go out in the yard and get him by his collar and take him into the house. And so he was very interested in wanting to be outside. And even after I got him back in the house. He wouldn't lay down. I had to end up getting him up on the bed and between my wife and I in order to get him to go to bed. So whatever it was, again, there's just that low hum. And thinking back in my own history, I had experienced that one other time, and that was also on a farm, in a farm situation where I used to live on my grandparents' farm. It's just interesting that a lot of your cases is in a farm. I'm in a farm. It seems to be that the more rural you are, the more experiences happen. And I wonder if it's because there's less opportunity for interruption on the case of, a stranger or a passerby happen to look and see something or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I think that's usually the case. This thing was like an explosion, and it
Mm,
was like during the time that there were sonic booms, and it was called a sonic boom several places.
mm,
But it was a lot different from a sonic boom because it was reported in newspapers all across the United States
right.
from all over, and I could pick up, each place where it was, and it was called an explosion in some places,
Mm,
and people were running out of their houses and calling the fire department and everything else clear
wow.
across the country. So it made a big impression, whatever it was.
Yeah, there's I was thinking as I was preparing for our conversation today, I was thinking about the Pascagoula case in general, and I was thinking about how so many of the things I think that happen probably around the world that are called one thing by a specific area because of the culture of the area or whatever the case may be, but in all actuality are probably the same thing, or if not even very just similar to other things that are called something completely different. And so what got me thinking about was the Pascagoula case. The description that is given for the creatures that conducted the abduction is very similar in description to the Flatwoods case in West Virginia, which is often compared to the Flatwoods monster. In that it has the claw-like hands, and that it kind of hovered across the ground as opposed to stepping and walking across the ground. I think that maybe the only key difference is the Flatwoods monster is often depicted as having a hood type structure, and the Pascagoula creatures did not. But it makes me wonder if how many of these different things that happen in your case, like some of them described as a sonic boom, some of them described as an explosion, in all actuality the same phenomenon. how many times is that the case that we often dismiss it, and instead of looking at it as 600 individual cases, maybe it's 600 accountings of a single case.
Yeah, I mean, I've discussed that before in comparing poltergeist and UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, people seem to think there's a distinction. I mean, like if you see a round ball and it's flying around, it could be a orb or a poltergeist, but it
Right.
could be a UFO too. And I mean, you don't know. I mean,
Right.
you can see the same thing and have different names according to your culture or, what you keyhole it into.
Right. Well, and it's very similar to, like I said in towards the beginning with your account of the tales of fairies and fae and elves and things of the 1700s and before. Are the fairies of then the grays of today. Um, they obviously there are some characteristic differences, but I mean, how many things have always been here just called something else, called jinn once upon a time, or genies, and now we call them Palladians or Venusians or whatever the case may be. um, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, when you had your experience as a child, and in maybe even any experience that you've had since then, did you have any kind of psychic tendencies or uh, clairvoyance or any of that sort of thing?
On one of them, I kind of did. And this was a different sighting. I was working at Ohio State University, and Ohio State University has Battelle Memorial Institute on one side and an airport on the other. Well, I was just going through my normal life. I mean, I wasn't into UFOs or anything.
Hmm.
And just suddenly, I became terrified of UFOs. I had no idea why.
Mm.
And I didn't go around talking about it because I was in the field of science and you don't go.
Right.
And so, anyway, I was so scared I didn't even want to go out of the house. And I kept hiding under trees and things. Of course, I had to go to work and all that. But for some reason, I'm just terrified. And I decided, well, maybe I should, this was in the 80s, maybe I should report to a UFO center. And so I contacted CUFOS and they sent me a report form. And at noon at work, I decided to start filling out the report form. Well, for some reason, I went up to the end of the building and walked down the stairs, and I saw something up in the sky that I couldn't figure out what it was. And so another person I knew came by, and I asked her, "What is that?" And we didn't know. And so we went to the office of the. It was in the medical school, the office where the department office,
Hmm.
and you could see it out the window. It had moved, and there were other people there, like professors and students and things, and everybody else saw it, and nobody had any idea what it was. It was very slowly rotating, and it seemed to have it was like a up and down rectangle,
Mm.
except it disappeared, and it had a light on the bottom, a bright light. And so anyway, it stayed there quite a while and continued rotating. And I called a person at Battelle that I knew something about UFOs. He was a scientist, and he called the airport and asked if they had anything, and they said no. And he
Mm.
said he looked up and he couldn't see anything, but all these people I was with could see it. And I got reports from them too. I mean, I promised them I'd never say their name,
Right.
but so I got filled out reports from them and turned them in. And the thing was, I mean, they explained it and told me it was a balloon, but it was going against the wind for one thing,
Mm.
and it was very slowly rotating. And people, when they wrote their descriptions, said that. And so it was something you just couldn't explain. It was back, there weren't any drones or anything back then, and it didn't look anything like a drone anyway. And so it was like I had sort of like a premonition. And then I was hiding under trees and things and scared to go out. But here I saw the thing in public.
Hmm.
I mean, in a public place by, a big scientific outfit and
Right.
airport and everything. But I had other witnesses. So it seemed, like something was telling me that, they're all over in a way. I
Do
mean,
you,
it's still.
So in your case where you had that kind of a clairvoyant experience where you were afraid of the UFO and wanted to kind of hide away from it, and then later when you saw it, do you recall if you had that sense of fear when you actually saw the UFO?
No, I was with people, and
Because you weren't by yourself, you weren't
yeah,
as makes sense.
so I tried to do a scientific job of investigating. Although obviously the professors at OSU didn't want their name in the paper or anything.
Right.
Although I did use a name many years later in a report.
So we talking about kind of the scientific community for a moment. Um, the U.S. government now has officially said there are things in our sky that we do not know what they are. Therefore, they are unidentified. And I think that the term now is UAP, and it used to be unidentified aerial phenomenon. I think now it's just unidentified aerial presence or something to that
Anomalous,
effect. But
aerial, anomalous
anomalous, yeah, unidentified anomalous
phenomena.
phenomena, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, which I guess is to include things that happen underwater and other places that aren't always aerial in nature. Um, but the fact that the U.S. government has now officially said, which I think is a big step forward, I think. Before they obviously had a program to investigate, but Heinig even said that the program was really to debunk more than anything. Um, but since they've come forward and said, yep, these things are real, we have bona fide cases where we can't explain what they are, at least not without breaking national security. Do you feel like, because I honestly don't, but I wonder what your take is. Do you feel like the scientific community would begin to open up to exploring, or at least trying to understand what these things are?
Oh, I think if they had grant money, that everybody'd come out of the closet and say, "Oh, yes, we're interested." But I don't think they're
Yeah, yeah, you're
mentioned.
you're probably right. If the government were to outsource the research to any university who was able to apply for the grant, you're probably right. Um, and just look at people who are kind of the big name folks in the media and such, like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye and others. And I look at them, and I understand they're also media personalities, but they seem to still be very much on the fence of being able to say, "Yep, I believe," or "I accept," or maybe "I believe" is the wrong terminology when talking to a scientist, but "I accept that these things are happening and deserve appropriate study."
Well, there's no money, and so it still sort of has a stigma too. And um, they say there's all kinds of hidden things in the government, which I don't know anything about. I mean, I worked for the DIA, and I suspected way back then that the government was hiding things. But I don't know what the government knows and what their purpose is. I, um, in it seems like it should open up and give their
Yeah,
information and say, yeah, we need to study this. I mean, that would be an intelligent thing to do, but this is government, so who knows?
yeah. Well, you know what? When we decided, excuse me, as a nation that we wanted to go to space, we created an agency to help us do that. Um, Now, one of the next kind of big mountains to climb is what are UAP, and yet we want to keep it close to the vest, and the government wants to keep it close to the vest and not really get anybody else involved. So it either feels to me, it either feels like they already know what's going on and they don't want anybody else to discover it, or they truly don't know what they don't know and don't want to come off as being ignorant on the topic. Um, but you're right. I mean, it's probably one of those things where if the government were to pass some research grant, $500 million for people to go figure out what these things are, I bet your research labs across the nation would jump on board.
There'd be a lot of believers in that case. They call it believers, and that's ridiculous because it's not a religion, and it
Right.
insinuates that you're some kind of a mystical nut or something. if they would just say there's to examine the evidence or something,
Right.
and what's the evidence, and saying, well, you're a believer, that,
Yeah. No one becomes a believer by looking at evidence. They become a believer by having an experience they just can't explain.
well, I
Um,
don't even like that term. I just think you should say, well, this is the
I
evidence.
know. I'm. I agree. I'm just saying that there's
Yeah.
just the idea of being a believer is just one of those things that I know people who have been skeptics their entire life until they had a situation or an encounter they could not explain away and realized that there's more to this than maybe what they had given credibility to before. Um, so just out of curiosity, what are you? I know that I assume you're still involved in MUFON. I know that you're a field investigator. I assume you're still doing field investigations as they come up. But is there any part of the phenomena that you've not had an opportunity to explore or investigate that you would like to?
um the whole thing. And
All of it.
yeah.
um, so let me ask the question this way: are you a nuts and bolts? When you come down on UFOs, are you coming down that they are physical craft that are entering our aerospace and doing whatever they're doing, or do you feel that there's and or do you feel that there are other explanations? Me, for example, I'm willing to believe or accept that until we have a definitive answer that everything is possible until proven otherwise. So, what are your thoughts on it?
The same thing. I mean, that very first thing, it was way, way back in my, years ago. But I think it has instructions for me now, because this looked like nothing. It just was a tiny little thing, but it seemed to be able to influence our minds. And that gave me the sort of impression that whatever UAP is, it, um, it can probably take any appearance it wants to. Like you said, it just
Right.
depends on what you call it. That um, it it acts through your mind, and um, that it's maybe way beyond any. I mean, we're physical and we're molecular and all that. We don't know what that is. That may be totally different. It may not be technology. It may just be different. And like they used to say the universe is like 13.8 billion years old or something,
Right.
but now they're saying it may be twice as old. Well, they
Right.
always say UFOs may be 50 years ahead of us or something. Well, they could be, like 22 billion years ahead of us.
Right.
You
Exactly.
can imagine anything.
Yep. Look at how far we as a species has come technologically in the last 100 years. Then you take a civilization that, let's say, they're even just 1,000 years ahead of us technologically. That would be vastly different. They would have technology we would have no comprehension of. We would have no basis of comparison. We would consider it as magic more than likely. Just like people of the 1700s would consider the technology of today as magic. Um, and so, yeah, I think that that's spot on. I also, I have a theory, if you will, that um, people have experiences at key moments of time in their life when they need to have the experience um, to basically rock them to their core of their belief system as to what it is that they're willing to accept or the path in life that they're on. And that the experience is meant to serve as almost like an initiation, if you will, in some sort of a path to enlightenment, so to speak. In that you have the experience and then it changes your mindset, your way of thinking, and you start looking at other avenues, or you start maybe pulling in things within your inner circle of thought that you previously would have ignored, which grows you as an individual as well as your ability to relate to others that you are working with and are serving in some capacity. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think the first one, that the first one in our bedroom, that I realized something was really, really, really strange. Like, I still have after effects from it, and I don't even know why. But I didn't talk about it after I found out about UFOs. I was supposed to shut up and not talk about it, but and so I didn't talk about it for quite a while. But I was so young, I didn't have a personality or a character or anything else. So it didn't change my outlook on life or anything, but it was always there.
Yeah.
And, so I was always real open minded about everything.
Right. So, I mean, even at an early age, though, even though you didn't necessarily have opinions that you had formulated, it kind of served as an anchor, if you will, for your personality to be more open to the unknown because of that experience you had as a child.
Yeah. I mean, they say, that it changes people and things like that. Well, there wasn't anything that changed in my case. I was just a kid and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know, I didn't know aliens or UFOs or
Yeah.
anything else at that time. So it wasn't like that, but it was something that, sank down in my
That,
brain.
yeah, stayed with you throughout your life. Yeah, very interesting. So we're about to wrap up. I want to give people an opportunity to you have a number of books that you've written. Is there an easy way that folks can find your books, or if you've got any books in the works that may be coming out soon that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I have a website called irenascott.com, and it's Irena Scott, both together, not separate words.
Okay.
And then my books are on, let me see, are on, this is the most recent. The books are on Amazon.com.
Okay. And so that was the one you just held up for those that are listening, was Beyond Reasonable Doubt.
Yes.
And wow, that is a humongous book.
It has all kinds of data and
Yeah,
photographs and everything you can imagine.
I'm gonna definitely have to pick that one up. I'm curious if I order it. First of all, is it available for order on your website
My website, you can click on the book and it just goes into
to the Amazon?
Amazon.com.
Okay,
So you just click on the
I'm
book.
curious, and I may hit you up after the fact. Maybe I can pick up a copy and mail it to you, and you'd sign it for me.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So once again, Irena Scott, thank you. Make sure you pick up her books, especially the one that we just spoke about, the Beyond Reasonable Doubt. It's already in my cart on Amazon, and I'll be purchasing that soon. Um, and make sure you check out her website, irenascott.com. And all of those links will be in the description of the podcast. And if you're watching this on YouTube, check the description of the video. Those links can be found there as well. Thank you, Irena, for being on the show once again. And I hope you have a good rest of your year and a great 2024.
You do too. Thank you. Glad to be here.